Hello, hello, hello. This is Susie Walker from Psychologies magazine, and I am joined today by the wonderful Dr. Pippa Grange, who has written this fantastic book, Fear Less: How to Win at Life Without Losing Yourself. Pippa is a psychologist, and she is you coached the English football team, a sports psychologist, aren't you?
Yeah.
You've been a psychologist in areas where success and achievement and being the best that you can be really matters at that kind of high-end sport. And so that's why it's so interesting that you've written a book. So I'm so delighted to be talking to you today. Welcome, Pippa.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be talking to you too.
So you've had a very long and exciting career in psychotherapy. So what has made you write this book? What inspired you to write this book?
Well, as you said, I've spent really 25 years almost in boardrooms and locker rooms and coaches' boxes and on the sideline and the side of the track and the side of the pool, and spent a lot of time with people who, to everybody else looking in, they look uber successful and they look like they should be feeling great when they have the medal haul or the results or whatever else it looks like. And I noticed over the first sort of maybe 10 years of that career that there was a really consistent pattern of those people who had all the trappings of success feeling unfulfilled and empty, and feeling still that urgency and that chase to be something more. There was never a sense of good enough, or never a sense of a place where they could rest, really. And I started to put I suppose over a long period of time, I started to join the dots and see the patterns of how prevalent and common that underlying fear of not being good enough was. And while I was on the surface working as a performance psychologist, while I was working regularly on how to control this in the moment fear of, so, you know, to manage anxiety in the pursuit of a performance, there was this shadow background stuff that was about not being good enough, and a sense of sort of self-doubt and shame that really blighted somebody's ability to feel joy in all the amazing things that they were achieving. So I wanted to try and gather the stories and the insights from this sort of, you know, the two shades of fear, of in the moment fear, and then this underlying not good enough fear. And also how often that not good enough fear distorts and disguises itself as something else, is that emotional experience is disguised as perhaps jealousy or superiority or judgmentalism, or you know, the need to stay separate, or perfectionism, and how those things actually, you know, they have the same root cause, and so working on that root cause is a huge unlock for a lot of people in that domain. I think a lot of all of us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, what's interesting about what you just said is that it's so interesting to hear. As you say, when you see these incredible sports people, or those people over there who look so successful, you would never imagine in a million years that fear was driving them. But again, it's that when we project onto other people, when you're saying about between superiority or arrogance, or it may show up, fear may show up when we're looking at other people. But I think it's maybe easier to work on yourself when you perhaps know that there's something wrong, and you think, okay, I'm trying to deal with fear here, and then you can do some of the process that you've been talking about. But can you do anything when, you know, you're seeing it as arrogance, or you're seeing it as perfectionism, or you're seeing it? Is there anything you can do when you see it in other people? What do you do when you see it, fear kind of, projected in someone else? Can we do anything about that?
In a cultural sense, you mean, when you see it projected into a culture? Is that what you mean when you see it in others?
No, I was thinking more like, so maybe if you've got a boss who's a bully, for example, and
right,
they understand that they're actually really scared. So can we do anything about that, or is it really up to the person to look at their own fears?
We can do something about that on a couple of levels. I think when we understand more about fear and its disguises, it can allow you two things. It can allow you to find empathy where previously you might have just had frustration or resistance or dislike for the behavior that you're seeing in another person. It can allow you to sort of shift your perspective and say, okay, well, maybe something's up here, maybe something else is going on. And then in those, I feel very strongly about bullying and bullies, especially in the workplace. And I think that it does give you a sense of fortitude and calm, perhaps, to be able to think about how you want to deal with it. And that might look like not being in that environment. I talk about the culture of fear quite a lot in the first part of the book. And, sometimes it is the right option to turn your back on a bullying culture if you have that option. And when we don't have that option, you still have layers of possibility of how you might find a way to voice your values, how you might find an empathetic and compassionate way to kind of say, hey, that's, this is what I'm observing and feeling. And there's a story in the book around a woman who I've called Harjeet in the story. Obviously, they're de-identified people, who is in a very male-dominated environment and is feeling very isolated and bullied might be a bit extreme, but certainly discriminated against and made to feel uncomfortable. And how she, once she understands her own fear and what she's observing, and she understands what's happening for other people, she finds a really great way of opening very vulnerable conversations, bold but vulnerable for her conversations that change everything, because she can actually put on the table what she's seeing in a way that leaves her with a sense of power and personal power and esteem, and really turn down the dial on fear between her and the others.
Can you give us an example of the kind of vocabulary that we could use if we found ourselves in that kind of situation where, it feels like some kind of discrimination, or it feels like can't quite put your finger, but some kind of bullying? What kind of language can we start using in that situation?
I think the most important thing to do is to make to spend the time reflecting yourself about what your experience of it is and share that. So what we want to do, because we're frustrated or angry or feeling really uncomfortable, if we want to raise it, sometimes there's an angry energy in that. And we want to lay the blame on the other person straight away, or articulate what they've done wrong and make it about them. And of course, that makes the energy and the dynamic between the two immediately sort of defensive. So what I have found where people do really well with this is to be able to say, I am having this experience in my interactions with you. This is what I'm experiencing. This is where when scenario XYZ happened, this is what I experienced, and it made me feel rubbish. And I want to put it on your radar. I want to illuminate that for you so that you might reflect on that and see, what you think, your part in that was, and I'll do the same. And I'd really like to think we can move beyond that. So,
wow.
place. Yeah, it's powerful because you're explaining that there's something up, but you're describing it from a position of your experience rather than, hey, you're making me feel uncomfortable, or you're bullying me, or language like that that's straight away, because there's often defensiveness around that kind of thing, and we need to be able to get to the root in a compassionate way. Compassion is really huge in these scenarios, but we have to first deal with that angry energy or that fearful energy. They're very close, actually, to be able to sort of say, okay, what do I really feel, and what is it costing me? And that's the sort of overarching method in the book for Not Good Enough Fear, which is really see it and know what's going on, then face it, as in face the cost in your own life, and then look to replace it. And the various suggestions, but the language is critical, and the positioning of owning, genuinely, powerfully owning what this is for you, without having to lay blame.
I mean, that's a piece, isn't it, that what I picked up on there is you're not blaming someone else. You're just saying, this is how I'm feeling. This is my experience of this. And let's open the conversation to that. You know, what's going on there. Brilliant, really, really brilliant. When you've been dealing with lots and lots of different people in the book and lots of fantastic, quite really moving case histories. What are the most common fears that you find people facing?
They're kind of, there's sort of a batch that go together, which are fear of failure, fear of not being lovable, fear of being rejected, all under this large umbrella of fear of not being good enough. As human beings, we are probably one of the most vulnerable. Well, we are the most vulnerable mammal for the longest period of time, and wired deep into our own unconscious is the fear of being abandoned. And that in our contemporary life manifests as a fear of being left out or, rejected in some way, not good enough. So not, it's a survival perspective that actually kicks in for us to say, I need to do everything I can to avoid being on the outside, to avoid being left behind, avoid being abandoned, avoid being rejected or unloved in some way. And that creates just a tremendous energy of fear that we need to understand and be able to turn the volume down on and choose alternatives that are more hopeful and stronger for us.
And how do we do that? I mean, how do we do? I know in the book there's full of fantastic techniques, and you talk about in the moment fear, and you talk about the kind of dealing with that kind of the background fear that may be driving your thing. But are there practices that you can share with us on this call for people listening? Obviously, go and buy the book. But for people listening here, what are the things that they can start looking at, or some real practical tips for them to really acknowledge fear, face their fear, and find a new soundtrack for their life?
Yeah. I think when it comes to sort of really seeing the fear, one of the most important things to do is have the patience to stay with it. Fear is uncomfortable. We want to fix it, move it, close it off. We don't want to hang around with fear. When we feel it, we want to move in the opposite direction. And sometimes that means we fix the wrong thing, or we fix something superficially and move on. And so the first thing I would say is have the courage and the patience to stay a little bit longer. Those kind of questions that ask yourself, what would be the worst thing that could be revealed about me? What would happen if this relationship did break? What would happen if I did fail, if I did, and ladder that down of the real consequences, not the hypothetical, maybe anxiety type consequences, but really ladder down. And when you get to that nub of something shameful for you, or something genuinely anxiety provoking that you don't want other people to understand about you, or you don't want to expose yourself or risk other people knowing about you, it's extraordinarily freeing. And it allows you, courage and vulnerability go, they're like peas and carrots. Absolutely very close. And I think when you can really have that intimate conversation with you, which takes time to go in, find out what's at the nub, and then how do I want to do something with that? Well, first, once you've done that, which is often quite a revelation to people, it sounds odd, but say, actually, I'm really afraid of not being good enough in a relationship. And that manifests for me as possessiveness or jealousy. That's costing me intimacy in my relationship. That's meaning I can't actually show up as me because I'm constantly performing. I've constantly got some kind of mask on. That means that, I'm missing out on intimacy. I'm missing out on the depth of relationship, and my mental freedom is, I'm paying way too much mental rent to act like that. Then what do I want to do about that? And there's a series of things in the book that I talk about that are very powerful sort of antidotes. I don't think we have time to run through them all, but just as headlines, understanding that you do have the pen in your hand in terms of changing the narratives that are running you. We think we're running the narratives in life, but narratives are running us. So, what is the story and set of ideas that you're living by, and how can you start to unpack those? And then I talk about purpose, which I feel so strongly about as having, we have, 60,000 thoughts a day, most of which are negative and repetitive. And, we do need to intervene on that. But what that can mean is that we get quite insular. We can easily drop into a vortex of our own insular concerns. And purpose for me, the difference between goals and sort of, self-ambitions and purpose is that purpose is about something outside of yourself. It might be the planet, your community, your child, something else, but it's outside of you. And when we can engage in purpose, we automatically, naturally turn down the space or move out some of the space that fear has at our table, because fear takes up way too much room. It's very undiscerning and not very polite. So I think purpose is an excellent one too. And then I talk about surrender and or useful surrender, which is not the same as giving up. Surrendering is recognizing that maybe the level of control that you think you have in life is a little bit overblown. Maybe there's some illusion in that. Maybe life has got more mystery in it than we like to think. Maybe there's more to do with soul making than we like to admit. And giving way to the idea that it's not all about what you can do or control, and your best effort is a good effort. Understanding that there's value in understanding other resources outside of yourself. And I think also surrender looks like letting go in the moment, which can be laughing. It's hugely beneficial in the face of fear. And it's not the same as ignoring it or dismissing it. It's about how can I bring, my own sense of wit or fun or just release into this moment. So I give the example in the book of if that means headbanging to some awful tune that you don't want anyone else to know is on your playlist, go do it. It's fine, because there's a value in the release against fear. So there's a number of methods, or not methods, there's a number of sort of ideas, philosophies, I guess, that I think are extremely useful for people to consider. We have these ideas that dreams are for, you have your head in the clouds if you're a dreamer, and I have a very different perspective on that. I think dreams are extraordinarily useful in the face of fear. They're a way of channeling energy towards outcomes that seem loopy to the next person, but they are magnificent as an anchor in our own life, and they certainly don't mean a lack of discipline. So, coupled with desire, dreams and desire together are probably about the only energy that is equal weight to topple fear. So there's a number of those sort of ideas and sets of questions and stories that illuminate the possibilities of those themes that are in there. But, the central piece is first have the courage to stay long enough to really work out your fears, and then face what they're costing you. And then there are multiple methods to think about what might I replace that with that's outside of me, not just about managing yourself, which of course is extremely valuable, but let's get outside of myself for a moment, because that's extremely beneficial in the face of fear. So there's quite a lot in there that's usable. My great hope for the book is that it's a practical ally for people. It's like a long conversation. The book is like a long conversation, hopefully with a friend.
It's a wonderful, wonderful book, Pippa. I mean, as editor at Psychologies, I get to read lots and lots of different books, but I resonated so deeply with some of your words. I mean, just what you're saying in this interview, that, courage and vulnerability are so, are so intertwined. The thing about purpose and surrender. I mean, what you're talking about is kind of the wisdom that it's, if only, we knew this at the beginning, when I've got a teenage son, and I'm just saying to you, you've got to read this book. You've got to read it, because this gives you kind of the building blocks. We all feel afraid. And this is a way to sort of, we gently and compassion. Yeah.
sorry, I interrupted you, Susie. I was just going to say there's nothing more natural than fear. It will keep coming up.
Yeah.
So, you know, having a really good handle on how to manage it is a fantastic thing. In the moment fear, we just turn the hazard lights off with techniques, and you know, as you know, they're in the book. But then when it comes to this sort of background sneaky thief of fear that steals all your joy, you know, we really do have to dig a bit deeper. But it's a valuable exercise, because it's, you know, your mental freedom is at the other side of that.
I mean, mental freedom is the other side of that. I mean, that's absolutely right. This is a book that we should all be reading. We all feel afraid. And this is almost like a handbook, a very compassionate, loving, honest, very honest. A lot of the cases is one that made me cry. It's really, really great. Pippa, thank you so much for writing such an inspirational book. Brilliant. Everyone should go out, immediately go and read this book. It's fantastic. Lots of love, Pippa. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Because I know you've got... so lots of love. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You too.